Every tear falls down for a reason, but I promise I won't cry for you. By rayrae118. Chapter 17. Snape looked up at the sound of the knock on his door, and set aside the essay he had been grading. An abysmal effort by a second-year Hufflepuff, barely worth the parchment it had been written on. He opened the door to see Black standing on the other side. Sirius tried not to let any apprehension show.
Snape, you wanted to speak with me?
Snape nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for the defense professor to enter his office. Once both men were inside, Snape put up several privacy wards. That act done, he leaned against his desk and observed his one-time nemesis. Black looked composed. He was wearing his public face, the one Snape had seen staring up at him in an article of the Prophet a few weeks ago, when Umbridge had been arrested, Fudge ousted from office, and Bones named interim minister. His expression gave away nothing. Severus knew he would have to be the one to lead. Severus knew he would have to be the first one to speak here. He had, after all, been the one to ask Black for a word. His conversation with Minerva had been rather enlightening, and he knew that she was right. It was time to let go. Black may have been a prat, and the bane of his existence back in school, but he had to admit he had seen how much the man had changed. The Severus Black 15 or 16 or even 17 was nothing like the Sirius Black, Harry Potter's guardian, fiancé to the interim Minister of Magic. After a few minutes of silence, Snape finally spoke. I talked to Minerva a few weeks ago, he admitted gruffly. Sirius raised an eyebrow. Oh? Oh? He queried blandly. Snape nodded. I've had some concerns about Albus for a while, and I thought she would know. As it turns out, she was already aware of most of it.
And the rest?
Sirius asked, crossing his arms across his chest and shifting his weight to one leg. Snape shrugged. Albus wants me to teach Potter occlumency this term. Sirius furrowed his brow.
Harry's already mastered occlumency,
he informed the potions master. Snape nodded. I know. And I would bet anything that Albus knows as well. So, why ask me to teach him?
And just how do you know that Harry's mastered the subject?
Snape bit his lip. I read cursory thoughts and emotions on occasion, he admitted. He saw Sirius gearing up to tear into him, so he hurried on with his explanation. I never go deeper without permission, but sometimes hearing those surface thoughts can stop something from happening, especially in the past before Potter's club united in the majority of the school. Sirius nodded.
I understand. I may not like it, but I do understand.
Does Albus do this as well? Snape shrugged. I'm sure he's tested Potter's defences, but I haven't been able to get anything from the boy in over a year. Not even surface thoughts. So I doubt he has either. Sirius smirked internally, knowing no one would have been able to see anything once Harry had begun wearing his charmed bracelet. The Blacks were a paranoid bunch, and their family magic was strong. Those charms he and Harry had used were powerful.
So, why ask you to teach him?
Snape shook his head exasperatedly. I think he sees it as another test. Another way of gaining control over the boy. Either that or he's hoping I'll wear him down or something. It's not any secret that I can't stand the boy, but I'm seeing fewer and fewer reasons to go along with his plans. Sirius essentially smiled. Good, he said. Albus has a lot to answer for. The real question is, can we put aside our history to actually work together? Harry says you've been better over the last year, but he's also told me about his first 3 years of potions. Did you really ask him about things he wouldn't learn for at least another 2 years in his first class? Snape actually looked guilty, turning his gaze from the floor.
I spent so long hating James Potter that I immediately transferred all of that onto his son, before I had even met him. It wasn't right, and I know I should speak with him. I was so lost in my own pity party that I didn't see the signs.
Sirius leaned further forward, slightly, confused.
What signs?
Snape looked up, focusing at the man right in front of him. How much like Lily he really is. And what was going on with his relatives. Sirius started. You know. His voice was quiet. Snape nodded. Minerva told me. But when I think back on the last few years, I could see the signs. I know how an abused child acts. I ought to, after my own childhood. But I was so set in my ways, unwilling to see the truth when it was staring me in the face, that I ignored it. Even if he weren't Lily's child, no one should have to deal with that. Sirius sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. What are you hoping will happen today? He asked curiously. Snape shrugged again. Minerva suggested that I speak with you. And she's right. Everything between us, it's in the past. Mistakes were made on both sides, and maybe there's too much between us to actually be friends. But I am tired of being angry. I am tired of holding on to the hate. Sirius raised an eyebrow. That was certainly unexpected. For what it's worth, I am sorry. I never actually expected you to go to the Whomping Willow that night. Merlin, Snape, you never listened to me before. Why that one time? Snape shook his head. Truthfully, he didn't really know. So, he hedged. Sirius let out a chuckle. We can't really start over, and yeah, I don't know if I'll ever actually like you. But mutual non-aggression? Snape snorted. Sounds good, he agreed, holding out his hand. Sirius took it, shaking firmly. A knock at the door distracted them, and the Black Lord looked over confused. Snape looked uncomfortable. I did say I should speak with Potter. I asked him to come down after his Quidditch practice was over. Enter! He called out. Sirius stepped aside and watched as his godson walked into the office, looking nervous but trying to hide it. You wanted to see me, Professor? He asked cautiously, raising an eyebrow as he noticed his godfather in the room as well. Am I in trouble? No, not at all, Sirius replied hastily. I didn't know you were coming. Should I leave the two of you alone? He asked, turning to Snape. Snape considered and then gave a single nod. It might be easier to have this conversation if it was just him and Potter. Sirius returned the nod and turned back to Harry. I'll see you later, all right? Harry smiled at his godfather, but knew it probably showed all the butterflies in his stomach as the man left. When it was just him and the potions professor alone, Snape gestured for the teenager to take a seat, which he did, his nerves jangling. Snape studied the son of his childhood nemesis and his best friend, while Harry grew increasingly anxious. After a minute of silence, Harry finally spoke. Is everything all right, Professor? Snape nodded, sighing. His mask dropped a little, and Harry was surprised to see the emotions on the professor's face. There was trepidation, tiredness, caring, and even a little fear. I'm not sure if you are aware that I attended school with your parents. He paused and waited for Harry's nod to tell him that the student had known. Your father and I did not get along. He, Black, Lupin, and Pettigrew spent most of our 7 years at school playing pranks on the Slytherins, but me in particular. That's not to say we did not retaliate, and to be fair, our retaliation probably did cross over into cruel and vindictive on more than one occasion. Harry nodded. He remembered Dumbledore telling him that Snape and his father hadn't gotten on at school, and how his father had saved Snape's life, which was why the professor had saved him from Quirrell's jinx on his broom in his first year. Sirius had given him more information, telling him about his prank on Snape that had almost gotten the Slytherin killed, and how much Sirius regretted it. How his father at Remus hadn't spoken to Sirius for 2 months afterwards, how he had had to work to regain their trust, and how much more he treasured their presence in his life when they were friends again. He had run away from his parents' house the summer after an incident, knowing that he needed to get out from under the dark influence. Snape shifted in his seat. Your mother and I, on the other hand, were very close for a few years. Did you know that we grew up in the same neighbourhood? Harry shook his head, surprised. Why had no one told him that before? Snape nodded, his eyes glazing over a little, as he thought back to his childhood friendship. I was the one who told Lily that she was a witch. I told her about Hogwarts and the Wizarding Society as I knew it. She helped me so much more, though. My home life was not exactly what one would call good. Harry looked even more surprised. Could it be he had more in common with the potions master than he thought? Lily was my escape. My Muggle father was a very unhappy man, and he took that out on me and my mother on more than one occasion. He wasn't quite certain why he was telling Harry this, but he figured if he had to start over with the boy, Harry deserved honesty. Even after we were sorted into different houses, Lily and I remained close. She received a lot of grief for it from her friends, but she wouldn't give up on me. I think Alice Pruitt was the only one of her friends who never tried to get her to stop speaking to me. Neville's mum, Harry cut in, then winced, expecting some sort of blow-up from the professor. But Snape just nodded, his thoughts still in the past. Alice was a very kind girl, an attribute she never lost as she grew up. He paused again, unsure of how to cover his falling out with his best friend. Harry, of course, asked the question before he really was ready to speak about it. What happened between the two of you? Sirius mentioned some sort of altercation in your 5th year, but he wouldn't say much about it. Snape sighed. Not one of my finer moments, he admitted, rubbing a hand over his face. Your father and I got into somewhat public argument over our OWL exams, in front of a rather large crowd. Lily tried to come to my defence, but in my embarrassment, I called her a mudblood. Harry inhaled sharply, and Snape looked up, the shame clearly written on his face. It's something I've regretted since I said it. I tried to apologise, but for Lily, it was just the final nail in the coffin. And she was probably right to leave me behind by that point. I had spent so much time listening to and spending time with various future Death Eaters. Avery, McNair, names you probably know all too well. And she hated how I would treat her as well. And she hated how I would treat her well, and then put down every other Muggle born in the school. She should have left me behind long before she did. Harry felt the sympathy rise in him. He could clearly see how much Snape regretted his actions. Why did you switch sides? He asked. If you're willing to tell me. Snape felt his heart stop. He swallowed harshly and closed his eyes. I will tell you. But you'll probably want nothing to do with me afterwards. Harry grimaced. I need to know. I can see how much you regret everything you've done. But if I'm going to trust you, I need you to give me a reason. Snape nodded. Roughly 16 years ago, Albus Dumbledore was interviewing a potential candidate for the position of divination professor. I was sent by the Dark Lord to spy on the headmaster and gather information. I wasn't expecting to hear anything that day, but as the interview wrapped up, I overheard the first part of a prophecy. I was thrown out before I heard all of it, but I reported what I knew to the Dark Lord. And he went after my family, Harry breathed as his eyes went wide. Snape sighed. As soon as I heard that he thought it applied to you, I went to Dumbledore. To my shame, I didn't really care what happened to you or your father. But I couldn't bear it if I had had some role in Lily getting killed. But I in the end, it didn't matter. She died anyway. And, in my grief, Dumbledore made me vow to protect you. He trailed off into silence and waited for Harry's response. Harry's emotions were turbulent. He had known there had been a prophecy to start Voldemort on the path to destroy his family, but he hadn't known how the Dark Lord had been set on that path. He didn't know what to think. On one hand, Snape was the reason his parents were dead. The reason he had grown up with the Dursleys. The reason
Sirius had gone to Azkaban. Well, there were many people who had some part of blame to that, but if Voldemort had never killed his parents, Sirius wouldn't have been locked up. On the other hand, Snape had told him. He had disclosed the information willingly, trusting him to be able to handle it. He could see, just looking at the anguish on the professor's face, how much the man regretted his choices. "What did it say?" he asked quietly, his voice even, giving away nothing. Snape bit his lip. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. That's all I heard. So I don't know the rest." Harry nodded slowly. "You've done more for me than Dumbledore ever has, so thank you." Snape started, surprised. Harry almost smiled. "Dumbledore's known the prophecy for years, and I've asked why Voldemort came after my family, but the headmaster seems to feel I don't deserve to know." There was a hint of steel in his tone, annoyance for an old man who wouldn't let him live his own life. Snape chuckled a little, a sound Harry had certainly never heard coming from the stoic man before. The old man certainly plays things close to the chest. Harry raised an eyebrow. "A Muggle expression. I'm impressed." The chuckle turned into an actual laugh. "I am a half-blood, Potter." Harry nodded. The professor sobered. Harry shifted in his seat. "I can see how much you regret everything. And I can understand why you hated my dad. Sirius has told me a lot about their school days, so I know that they were bullies. Spoiled, selfish and arrogant. I've heard those words used to describe them many times. But you took that anger and put it on the shoulders of an 11-year-old boy who had never known the man you despised. How was that fair?" Snape winced and couldn't answer. It wasn't. He really had no excuse. Harry waited for another minute, but when no explanation was forthcoming, he just sighed. "As for the prophecy, it doesn't point exclusively to me. Why did he come after me?" Snape bit his lip. "I believe there were 2 options. You and Longbottom were both born at the end of July, and your parents had both defied the Dark Lord 3 times before your births. As for why you... I cannot speculate the Dark Lord's reasoning. I am sorry." "I am sorry." Those 3 words, more than anything else, stopped Harry in his tracks. Had Snape just apologized to him? Snape sighed. "It was not right of me to place my hatred on your father on you. I have no excuse for that." Harry cocked his head to the side slightly. "Something changed last year, though, didn't it?" It wasn't a question, even if it was phrased as one. "You used to pay a lot more attention to me in class. You picked on me for 3 solid years. What's different now? What changed?" One side of Snape's mouth quirked upwards. "You did. Something about living with Minerva and Black brought out the Lily in you. Or at least opened my eyes to the realization you are so much like your mother than I had realized." "How so?" Harry was curious. Sirius had told him a lot about his parents, but he was interested to hear what Snape thought. Snape smiled reminiscently. "Lily was kind and a caring person, who tried to see the good in everyone. I believe that leaving your Muggle aunt and uncle behind allowed you to open up more. You've become more outgoing, something all the professors have noticed. Just like Lily. Your schoolwork has improved significantly. Lily was incredibly gifted, particularly in potions and charms. 2 areas I believe you inherited her talent." Harry raised an eyebrow. "After 3 years of calling me a dunderhead, you're now changing your mind?" Snape shook his head. "Your work improved a great deal last year. I'm assuming you spent some time revising the subject?" Harry snorted. You could say that. My aunt and uncle always punished me when I did better than Dudley in school. So I guess subconsciously I was still holding back. Aunt Minerva took me to Flourish and Blotts and helped me pick up a bunch of books on potions. It was so much easier once I knew more about why cutting ingredients and stirring certain ways was important. Potions was the subject I was looking forward to most when I came here, until you started it on me immediately. In my first class. How was I supposed to know the answers to those questions? I looked them up later. Those questions wouldn't have come up until third year at the earliest. Snape winced. Not one of my finer moments, he admitted ruefully. I do apologise for that. But I can see, now, how your talent in the subject has emerged. The mark of a good brewer is intuition, and I can see that in you. To that end, I will promise to stop subjecting your grades to bias. I hope you can understand that I will need to maintain a public dislike of you, for those children of Death Eaters who still report back to their parents, but I won't go too far, and I'll give you the grades your work deserves. Can you maybe lay off the Gryffindors as a whole, at least a little? Harry asked reasonably. I know you've got that image to maintain, especially if any change might get back to Voldemort. But just tone it down, alright? I've had to work really hard on Neville's self-esteem. Something you've contributed to negatively for years. He's actually not that bad, without you breathing down his neck. Snape let out a breath of air. I'll try, he agreed. I have to admit, Longbottom and Weasley have improved this year as well. I'm guessing you lent them some of your books? Harry nodded. Ron was a little more hesitant, but even he had to admit that Potion Making for Dummies was one of the best books he has ever read. Snape chuckled. That book is very informative. Perhaps I should consider adding it to the first year book list. Harry nodded eagerly. It would have been very helpful to have a few years ago, he agreed. There was another moment of silence, as they each tried to think of something to say. Harry stood up awkwardly. Look, Professor, I know you regret everything, and I know that you wish you could change it. But there's something I want clarification on. Snape nodded stoically. You said that when you heard it might apply to me, to my mum, you switched sides. Snape nodded again. Harry sighed. Why should it have mattered? If it was me, or Neville, or anyone else, would you have cared so much if you went after Neville? Snape winced. Truthfully, he probably wouldn't have, back then. He looked into Harry's eyes, and he could see the teenager knew his answer. He clenched his hands into fists to stop them from trembling. Honestly, Potter? No. I probably wouldn't have. At least, not then. I switched sides because Lily was threatened. I can understand how horrible that sounds, and I know it was wrong. Now, but back then, all I cared about was my childhood friend. Harry opened his mouth to speak, but Snape kept going, his eyes glazing over a little as he got caught up in the past. All I wanted was revenge. On my father, on your father, on Black, on everyone who had made my life a living hell. When I overheard the prophecy, I thought that was my ticket to power. I thought I could get my revenge. It took me a long time to realise that an eye for an eye does in fact make the whole world blind. Harry snorted at the Muggle saying, even through his anger. Snape shook his head, sighing ruefully. Revenge doesn't solve anything, and power just corrupts people. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, Harry broke in, smiling softly. Even if he was upset, he could see Snape's regret. Snape nodded. So that's what happened to Albus, he mused quietly. Harry snorted again, agreeing. Snape looked up, right into those bright green eyes. Lily's eyes. If I had one wish, it would be to go back and not tell the Dark Lord anything, he stated. I wish I hadn't gotten involved with the Death Eaters. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of, Harry.
but betraying my best friend tops that list. Harry bit his lip, thinking over what he had learnt that evening. He didn't really know what to feel. Snape had been honest, but he was also the reason why his parents were dead. And more than that, he had willingly admitted that only reason he had switched sides was because it had been Lily who had been threatened. If Voldemort hadn't focused on anyone else, Snape probably would still be a willing Death Eater. Maybe. Harry truthfully didn't really know what else may have contributed to Snape's change in views. But for him to be thawing out and sharing this information, surely there had to be other factors involved. After several minutes of silence, Harry sighed. I should probably get back to my friends. I'm sure Ginny's wondering where I am. Snape nodded, taking down the privacy wards. Thank you for hearing me out, he said, words forming uncomfortably in his mouth. Harry shrugged. Thanks for telling me the truth. I'm not really sure what to do with everything you told me, but I'll think about it. Did you have a similar conversation with Sirius too? Is that why he was there? Snape nodded again. We've put aside the past, and while we'll probably never become friends, we will be able to coexist in peace. Harry smiled. Good, he replied. I know he regrets how he acted as a teenager. Snape shifted uncomfortably. I do as well. We all have regrets, Potter. Harry, the only thing we can do is acknowledge our mistakes and promise to do better in the future. Harry was unused to a philosophical Snape, so he stumbled out a good night and headed up to find his friends. Ginny had told him that they were going to spend the evening in the Room of Requirement studying, so he headed up to join them. Ginny looked up as Harry flopped down next to her on the solitary sofa in the room that they had created for their animagus practice. In the rest of the space, Hermione was working on levitating her feather, while Susan was working on transforming her arms into wings. Ron had managed to change one arm into a fur-covered limb. Neville had successfully traded in his arms and legs for those of a wolf. What's wrong? Ginny asked worriedly, taking in his almost shocked expression. Harry looked over at his girlfriend. Snape just apologised to me. His declaration caused Neville's limbs to return to his normal, while Ron lost his concentration. The fur retreated and his arms turned back into a human's. Susan's wings disappeared and Hermione's feather dropped back to the ground. What? Ron asked, his eyes widening as he looked at his best friend. Harry grimaced. He apparently had a change of heart and decided that holding on to a 2-decade-old feud with a dead man was not healthy. He talked to Aunt Minerva a while back, and I guess she convinced him to speak with me and Sirius to clear the air. What did he say? Neville asked cautiously. Harry looked over at his friend. Of all of them, Neville deserved to know. He repeated the lines of the prophecy that Snape had told him. He was the one who told Voldemort. He barely acknowledged Ron's lack of a flinch at the name. When he found out Voldemort thought it might be me, he went to Dumbledore. Turns out he and my mum were really good friends in school. Neville furrowed his brows. The prophecy doesn't seem to point to you directly, he commented quietly. Harry nodded somberly. Snape didn't know the rest of it, but with the party overheard, there were 2 options. Me or you. Neville inhaled sharply. So, why you? Harry shook his head, biting his lip. Snape doesn't know, and neither do I. So, why did he tell you all this? Susan asked curiously. Snape's the reason Voldemort went after your family. I know, Harry nodded, but I could see how much he regretted it. For some reason, I trust him. He actually told me why he switched sides. Dumbledore just said he trusts Snape, but that doesn't really mean anything to me. Snape actually gave me a reason. Even if indirectly he is the reason why my parents are dead, it helps. He may have hated my dad, but I don't think he wanted him to die. Hermione smiled softly, leaning forward. I'm proud of you, Harry. I'm glad that you'll both be able to put aside the animosity. Hopefully, things will get a little better from here.
Harry sighed. He'll still have to act like an arse, he admitted. There are still children of Death Eaters who report to their parents, so he can't give them a reason to doubt his support of Voldemort, or he's dead. But he did agree to stop laying into the Gryffindors so much and to grade our work fairly. I'll take what I can get, Neville said, chuckling. They all agreed that it could be only a good thing, and went back to work for another hour or so, before it was time to return to the common room. Are you sure you're all right? Ginny asked as they headed back to the tower. Harry sighed mentally. I don't know, he admitted. I know he regrets what he did. I know my dad and Sirius weren't blameless, but he still hurt me a lot. And he spent the last few years hating me for what my father did to him. Ginny nodded. It's not right, but I'm proud of you. He quirked an eyebrow and Ginny smiled. You're willing to rise above all the animosity. You're a good person, Harry Potter. Harry blushed as they reached the fat lady's portrait and entered the common room. It was easy to see how much he wished he could go back and do things differently. He blames himself for my mum's death. They grew up in the same neighbourhood and were really good friends, until they called her a mudblood in their 5th year. He felt Ginny's gasp of horror as he collapsed into an armchair by the fire. Ginny sat next to him on the same chair, forcing him to scoot over as much as possible as she cuddled into his side. I believe him when he says how much he regretted it from the moment the word came out of his mouth. But their friendship was over after that. According to him, Mum didn't like how much time he spent with his Death Eater friends, Avery and McNair and the like. I really think he would jump at the chance to go back and redo everything. Ginny nodded, understanding. Harry looked over at her, his eyes almost amused. You did say something interesting, though. We all have our regrets. The only thing we can do is acknowledge our mistakes and promise to do better in the future. I never thought Snape could be philosophical. Ginny snorted. He's right, though, she said. The only thing we can affect is the future. Worrying about the past won't do anything but make us depressed. Harry nodded and gave her a kiss, and then pulled out his charms textbook to work on an essay that was due at the end of the week, before he and Hermione had to head out for patrol. Line break. Ravenclaw beat Slytherin in a narrow victory at the end of January, and Gryffindor slaughtered the Badgers 2 weeks later. Boo! The Lions were firmly cemented as the frontrunners for the Quidditch Cup, something that the entire house was ecstatic about. Lucius Malfoy tried to run against Amelia for Minister of Magic, but failed to even receive the necessary numbers of supporters in order to be put forward for a general election. In order to run, a witch or wizard needed to obtain the backing of at least 30 Wizengamot members and all department heads, which Malfoy failed to acquire. He could barely get 10, as a matter of fact. Many of those Dumbledore had written off as dark, but in reality were more neutral or leaning towards whichever side was shaping up to be the strongest, or not to back the Malfoy Lord. And so, on February the 2nd, 1996, Amelia Bones was sworn into office as the official Minister of Magic. There was a Hogsmeade trip on the weekend before Valentine's Day, which made everyone happy. Harry and Ginny spent the morning in the village, before returning to the castle to have an outdoor picnic in the Room of Requirement. It was a beautiful setting. A grassy field, complete with wildflowers, mountains in the background, and an overly full picnic basket courtesy of Dobby. Ron and Hermione had enjoyed their day as well, wandering through the village and having lunch at the Three Broomsticks, before heading back out and spending the rest of the afternoon walking around and talking. Neville had asked Hannah Abbott to accompany him, while Susan accepted a date with Michael Corner from Ravenclaw. Both had a good time, but weren't sure if any relationship would develop from the dates. Line break. On the actual day, Ron and Harry greeted their girlfriends with a kiss, before they headed out for their morning run. They returned an hour later to shower and get ready for the day. Ron surprised Hermione as they met up in the common room to head down for breakfast, presenting her with a wrapped package, his expression a veil of nervousness. Under her friend's gaze, she opened the present to find a pretty charm bracelet. There was only one charm,
a silver cat. Hermione almost tackled her boyfriend, kissing him joyously. Thank you so much, Ron. I love it. Ron smiled happily as they headed down to the Great Hall. Ginny's hand found Harry's as they walked. Did you help him at all? She asked curiously. Harry shook his head. I'm proud to say that Ron figured this one out all on his own. I really think he's growing up. His mental voice was amused, and Ginny knew he was joking. So, do we have any special plans for today? She asked impishly as they reached the Gryffindor table and started eating. Harry smiled mischievously. Meet me at the room of requirement for dinner. Dress nice. Ginny nodded, and they returned to their meals. Line break. Ginny showed up at the room of requirement at 6 o'clock that evening, wearing a simple navy blue dress that cut off at the knees. It was accented by a silver band around her waist and had off-the-shoulder cap sleeves. Harry looked up at her arrival and smiled. You look amazing, Gin, he said, his voice a little breathless. Ginny returned the smile and went over to kiss him. You look good too, Harry, she replied, stepping back half a step. He was wearing a black slacks and a light blue button-up shirt. Harry led her over to the table, which was laden with a feast for at least 4. He noted as he held her hand that she was wearing his mother's engagement ring that he had given her on her birthday. Ginny smiled Ginny smiled as she felt him caress that finger. I wanted to wear it tonight, on my finger, where it should be. Harry nodded. Soon, Gin. I promise. The pair did their best with the food, but there was still a sizable amount left over at the end. Harry chuckled. Dobby's great, but he can be a little over-enthusiastic at times. Ginny nodded, smiling. Well, despite there being way too much, it was great. I'm stuffed. Harry stood up and held out his hand. If you're not too full, would you care to dance? Ginny nodded again, taking his hand as Harry pointed his wand at the wireless sitting in the corner. Music started playing, and the pair spent the rest of the evening dancing in each other's arms. When it was almost time to head back to Gryffindor Tower, Harry led Ginny back to the table, where he pulled out a small box. Happy Valentine's Day, Gin. I love you. Ginny's heart felt like it was full to bursting. I love you too, Harry. You know you don't have to keep giving me things. Just you is more than enough. Harry smiled. I know, he replied. That's one of the things I love about you. I want to give you things, though. All that money in my vault means nothing to me. You're what's important. Ginny blushed and opened the present. It was a pair of earrings. They're beautiful, Ginny whispered, taking the earrings out that she was wearing currently, the sapphire ones Harry had given her last Valentine's Day, and put in the new ones. 14-karat gold, shaped like a phoenix, with a small topaz stone embedded where the eye should be. When the new earrings were in her ears, she looked back up and gave Harry a kiss, pulling back and showering him with a blinding smile. Thank you so much, Harry. I love them. Harry smiled back. I love you, Gin. I love you too, Ginny replied. She then reached down and pulled out a wrapped box of her own. It's not as much as your gift, but I'm sure it's amazing. Harry cut her off. Thank you, Ginny. He took the present and unwrapped it. It was a book. Harry looked up confused. He already owned the 7th year Charms textbook, having received it as a gift from Aunt Minerva for his birthday the summer before. This copy also looked rather worn. Ginny just smiled. Open it, she said softly. Harry did so, and then felt his breath catch in his throat. There, written on the inside of the cover, was the name Lily Evans. He looked back up at Ginny. The 4th year leaned closer, resting her hand over his. Professor McGonagall helped me a little. She said that a lot of students donate their used textbooks to the library when they graduate, and she was sure your parents did it. I spent the last 6 weeks searching through old books. I was hoping to find a book of your dad's as well, but no such luck. You should really read it, though. There's a lot of handwritten notes in the margins. Your mum was a genius. Harry nodded distractedly. Harry nodded distractedly and flipped through a few pages. He saw a few recipes written on the pages and instructions for potions he was sure she had invented herself. There were a few paragraphs that looked almost to be entire journal entries. Some that seemed to be spells that she had invented. His heart thudded painfully as he saw, written over and over again on the back cover, Lily Potter, Mrs. Lily Potter, Mrs. James Potter, Lily Evans Potter, and several other variations of the name. There were tears in his eyes as he thanked Ginny, hugging her tightly, trying to convey everything he was thinking. Ginny just smiled and returned the hug. She understood. End of chapter. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed that one because that was a beautiful chapter. I've got a lot to say about Snape. Frankly, I don't like him as a character. I mean, I like how he is written as a character. He's one of the best written ones ever. But in the original books, I just find him too abusive to kids for one chapter of memories to redeem him. That's just my personal thing though. I know a lot of people like him. In fact, you don't have to look this up if you don't want to, but apparently there was a religious movement called Snapeism. I'm not even kidding. I won't explain it all here, but it was kind of insane. But I do like that he is made accountable here and that he is trying. This version of Snape, I don't mind. Anyway, as well, that last bit with Lily's book. Oh my god, really? And also that bit, the two bits with Ron that I really like, 3 actually. He gets the Animagus transformation a bit before Hermione does, which is about time that Ron gets a bit more like ahead of her in something other than chess and general magical world knowledge. But the second one is he didn't flinch at Voldemort's name. That's definitely a step in the right direction. And the third, he didn't need help with Hermione's gift. Ah, Ron's growing up. Oh, I love it. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Check out my other videos as well. And remember to have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Look out for yourselves, my guys, girls, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!